So what's the Liftoff series all about? It really is providing you with some practical advice on how to boost your workplace and really provide you with best practices on, in this case, on how to manage and lead in a remote workplace. Clearly a hot topic considering the times that we're all in. And Richard and I decided, why not come together and, really approach a lot of these hot topics that we find with our clients and really approach it from two different lenses. One is the HR lens, that's where I'll come into play. And then the employment law and legal consideration lens, which is Richard. So today's topic is one that Richard and I both have had a lot of questions about how to navigate in this space of remote work. And actually just last night, I was reading this article, and tomorrow, March 11th, actually marks 1 year when COVID-19 was determined as or noted as a pandemic. So it's crazy to think about that. It's been a year. And here we are in this space still, and we'll talk about the HR and legal considerations. So a little bit of an introduction. I'm Sofia Arisheh. I'm happy to see some familiar faces on the call today. And to see some new faces as well. So welcome to everybody. I'm the principal and senior HR consultant at Upskill Consulting. We offer HR support and services to various industries, various size clients as well, and offer the full scope of HR. And Richard, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. So I'm Richard Johnson. I'm a co-founder and partner at Ascent Employment Law, and we are geared toward focusing on workplace legal issues. So wrongful dismissal type situations, employment law in general, WCB matters, and then human rights considerations. And so anything that touches on the workplace, we advise on and navigate our clients through. We take a pretty risk management style approach. So that's part of what the bent will be on today, is just making people aware of some considerations, and it fits very well with Sophia's wisdom, as I'll refer to it throughout my presentation.
Perfect. We will be sending out the PowerPoint deck as well, everybody, at the end of today's session. So you'll see an email from us right after with this, and then the link to the recording as well. So we've divided the section up into these two different moving pieces. The first piece is I'll walk you through the HR components, and we'll review some best practices of how to lead a virtual team. And then Richard will again share the legal considerations around remote work, so WCB, human rights, and much more. And of course, we'll leave some time at the end as well for some Q&A. So hopefully you have some questions that you'd like to ask us, and we'd be happy to answer any of those. So human resources. I know there's some of you on the call, so feel free to jump in as well with some of the best practices that you too have introduced in your workplaces. So it's really interesting, over the last little bit, as we've all had to navigate in this virtual space, oftentimes I get clients saying to me, Sophia, I just took it for granted how easy it once was to be able to walk to somebody's desk, walk by somebody in the hallway, go and grab a cup of coffee in the morning, and really engage in that real-time dialogue with somebody and get real-time responses and answers. And that's because we all oftentimes, and most of us, operated in that traditional type team where we had that face-to-face interaction. And then COVID-19 hits, and overnight, we move into this virtual team type atmosphere. For many of us, it was new territory. For some of us, maybe we've navigated in that space before, but it really required us to, as employers, really rethink and reimagine the way in which we do our work. So what I'm seeing right now, and Richard, let me know what you're seeing with clients, I'm seeing more of a hybrid type approach. So quite a few of my clients are having some people work from home a few days a week, and then they work in the office for the remainder of the time. And really the reason behind that is making sure that they abide by the social distancing and physical distancing, all of the health and safety measures in the office. So having a little bit of a roster and rotating shift has resulted in more of that hybrid type approach.
Yeah, I'm finding the exact same thing.
Yeah. So even that, operating in a hybrid approach is really difficult and challenging from an HR space as well. And then oftentimes I get asked, well, what does this mean? So let's just say COVID-19 is long gone and the dust has settled with all of that. What does it look like down the road? And I'm not too sure if we're ever going back to normal, whatever that once was. I think we need to start, looking at how will our workplaces look down the road, even once COVID-19 has, dissipated and we've moved past that. Really interesting survey done by Meru Reports. This was Canadian based. And I want you to look at the right-hand side of the screen here. So what it says is, if left up to employees, again, Canadians, if left up to employees, an estimated 40% of employee days would be worked from home after COVID-19 is over. So almost half of the work week, employees would like to be able to work from home once this is all over. Again, the right-hand side of the screen, 83% of Canadians polled who either work or worked from home during COVID-19 also say that they'd like to work from home at least sometimes once COVID-19 is over. So I think just looking at this, all of us kind of need to wrap our heads around, well, what is this going to look like down the road? In 2022, what's this going to look like? And even down the road, even further, how do we continue to attract and retain talent, knowing that a lot of employees really want to continue down this route of being able to operate or work from home, at least part-time? So a high-performing team, and what I want to walk you through today is a couple of best practices that I've seen work really, really well. I was actually first introduced to working in this virtual space and then managing and leading a virtual team when I worked at TELUS. And I can tell you, it was a huge, steep learning curve for me. I'd never done it before. And for me, it was really trying to understand, how do we operate in this virtual space where I actually don't see somebody face to face anymore? It's all like this, right? Video calls or phone calls or emails. And so I learned a lot of best practices during my time there. And I continue to implement that today with clients and with my own business. And so really a high-performing team encompasses all of these four things. I believe a high-performing team is productive, they're accountable, they're collaborative, and they are engaged. And I love my acronyms. So PACE, easy to remember, PACE. Richard's laughing. He knows I love my acronyms and color code.
You do. It's true. You keep us all organized.
There you go. So let's start with productive. So in order for any of our team members to be productive, they need to understand what their role is. What are the expectations of them? What are some of those deliverables? What are the target dates, right? We can't be productive if we don't know what we're supposed to be doing. And I believe it really starts with your onboarding of your new hires. So I encourage you to look at what your onboarding looks like today. Do your new hires really understand what their role is and what the expectations are of them? And if you are onboarding and integrating your new hires in this virtual space, what does that actually look like? How have you shifted from face-to-face onboarding to now virtual? It will require a little bit of creativity for sure, but it's really making sure that our people right at the onset of employment understand what they need to do so that they can be productive members right off the bat. Another thing that I've seen work out really, really well is having a virtual kickoff session. So you could really have a kickoff session at any given point, beginning of the year, right when COVID-19 hit, it could be at any point, right? And the objective of the kickoff session is to bring the entire team together and to really talk about, listen, we've worked under this umbrella of virtual for the past year. Let's talk about some of those challenges that you're facing and what are some of those solutions where we can work together to just mitigate some of that this upcoming year. What are the rules of engagement? How should we communicate with one another? Should we set up a weekly call? What day of the week is that? It's really making sure that the team is involved and there is communication there as to what's working and what's not working in this space of COVID-19 again. So having that kickoff session is really important to just level set and solicit feedback, as you see on bullet point number 4 here. And another thing I suggest for employers is always review and refine your processes and systems. You may have had processes that were in place that worked in that traditional type team or face-to-face, but maybe they're not working anymore in a virtual or hybrid kind of setting. So take a look, and if you start to notice that productivity is declining or tanking, it's our opportunity to kind of step in and go, okay, well, what is it? Is it the programs that we're using? Is it the systems? Is it processes? What is it exactly? And how can we improve it so that it is conducive in this virtual space? So a couple of tips there on productivity. Let's move on to accountability. So when I say accountability, what I mean here is they're not just accountable to themselves, but also accountable to the outputs of the team. And so in order for our teams to be accountable, again, they need to understand what the targets are, timelines, who's responsible for what. And in this virtual space, I remember during my time at TELUS, it kind of hit me really hard, kind of going, wow, this is really challenging to communicate with people virtually. And what I realized is we have to amplify and strengthen our communication. We need to communicate, and then probably communicate a little bit more. It can't just be verbal. So writing it down is really important in the virtual space. Using a platform to track those updates. And so on the right-hand side of the screen, you see a couple that I've used and I love. Asana is fantastic. Basecamp is great. Trello is great. Some of them offer free versions as well. I haven't used Microsoft To Do just yet, but I've heard from clients that that's been a game changer for them. It's a part of the Microsoft Office 365 suite. So I'm interested to know, and you can use chat or hop off of mute. Has anyone used any of these project management tools before?
I work with a software developer has created an app for me, and he works in Asana.
Yeah.
I probably should take a course on how to use it because I find it frustrating. It's just they're young, younger techie types, and my brain doesn't work the way their brain does. So I think part of it is just taking the time to go through a couple of videos on how to use it, or have them train me on how to use it, right? So
yeah,
that's a comment. I think it's probably a very powerful tool. It's just I don't quite understand how it works because I don't use it that often. So
yeah.
We had the same experience using Basecamp. We were developing our website for the law firm, and the developer created a portal for us through Basecamp, and it was the same type of thing, Murray. I had to learn the functionality and had my wrist slapped a couple of times, like that's a to-do, that's not a conversation. Put it over here, not put it over here. So there was a learning curve for me certainly as well, but it was pretty functional once you got the hang of it.
For sure, yeah. I see Megan's used the free version of Asana. I too have used the free version. It's great. I mean, some of the functionality, obviously you don't have full functionality when you use the free version, but with the free version of Asana anyway, you're able to write down all of the project tasks, assign it to a certain individual, and put down the target date as well. And so oftentimes what I would do with any of these types of tools is whenever I set up a weekly team meeting, which I always did in this virtual setting, I would have a rapid fire team meeting, and it didn't need to be lengthy. It literally was a half an hour once a week, recurring in everybody's calendar, going, we're meeting every Friday, let's just say 9:30 to 10 o'clock. Everyone hopped on the virtual call. I would share my screen. I would hop into one of these tools and we would just go through it. Where are we at with the projects? Do we need to shift anything? Are we getting too close to deadline dates? What have you? And it was really powerful because it allowed people to understand what they were responsible for, but also what their team was responsible for, so people could step in and assist where need be. So some great tools for you to use. I'm going to play around with Microsoft To Do, over the next couple of weeks and test that out and see if I can figure it out and play around with it. So engage in regular one-on-ones, schedule those weekly team meetings. What we have to remember in the virtual space, and this is what I often hear from employees, is that they often feel like they're working in silos when they're working from home because they don't have that human kind of connection or daily interaction with their teammates as they once did. And so having those check-ins allows you to not only check in on status of files and projects and work, but also really check in on how they're doing You know, it's going beyond kind of how are you? It's really how are you doing? You know, what were some of the wins last week? What were some of the challenges that you faced last week? How can I support you? So engage in that regular dialogue with your people. This one right here is all about collaboration and operating in a collaborative type team. And to be collaborative, we need to build trust, right? Because we really want our people to willingly share knowledge, brainstorm together, etc. And so we can only do that if the team has established that trust and that rapport and synergy with one another. And it's tough sometimes in a virtual setting to be able to do that. So a couple of things. I'd encourage you to use and leverage video as much as possible. I know people are, you know, there's Zoom fatigue, etc. I get that, but there are certain situations that would require a video. And one of those would be, these team meetings are fantastic to have video because we're mimicking face-to-face as much as possible. It really helps to build that team rapport and those relationships. Performance feedback type meetings. Don't do it via phone. Don't do it via email. Have that face-to-face type interaction via video so people can pick up on those nonverbal cues as well, and you can engage in more robust dialogue that way. So encourage people to turn on their video, explaining the why behind it. Encourage casual conversations. I'm going to show you a couple of examples in just a moment. Use team building activities. Even if your team has worked together for quite some time, why not include like a 5-minute quick team building type activity? I'll send you some links for that as well, some creative ways in which you can do that. And then create knowledge spaces. So I've seen a lot of companies create centralized drives or a space on their intranet to really house any of these PD type courses or any kind of learning opportunities. So have a centralized location where you can build that and where teams can share out and report out on some of the learnings that they've had. Let me talk to you a little bit about the casual conversations. This is what I've seen that's worked really well and something that I've done, again, in telecoms, and I continue to do today. Virtual hangouts, Q&As, coffee, lunch. My husband's company actually has something called Beer O'Clock. A lot of fun. His company is actually stationed out in the East. And so he gets to start his beer at 3 p.m. every day, and he loves it. He loves it. So you set it up whenever you like it, but beer o'clocks or wine o'clocks work. Water cooler get-togethers, coffee and learn. So if you want just a quick snippet, just a half-hour learning opportunity for the team, call it a coffee and learn. Buddy systems have worked. One of my clients actually started this, which was a daily conversation starter. On their internal drive or intranet, they would have a question. And it was great because everyone used that question in any type of conversation they had with their peers. So kind of fun way to do that. Picture sharing, I'll show you in a moment, and any team building type activities. So let me show you a couple of examples. I've encouraged my team members to change their background whenever we have a team meeting. So we pick themes, we pick topics, whatever it is. In this case, it's your favorite vacation spot. And so what a great opportunity. I'm probably going to ask the person with the penguins behind them, talk to me about that. When was that? Where was that? So it allows your team, again, to continue that relationship even in a virtual space. So it starts the dialogue. One of my clients started a drive and on their internet, and it was called Things That Make Me Happy. And what they asked their team members to do was to upload any photos of things that made them happy. And so there were a lot of photos of pets that you can see here, a lot of photos of nature, a lot of photos of family, which of course I can't show you because of confidentiality, but there were just a lot of photos in there that people uploaded, and it was amazing. There was a lot of dialogue. There were a lot of good laughs as people uploaded these photos as well. Some cool ideas that maybe you can implement. Has anyone done anything else in terms of building that collaboration and connectivity with their teams? I'd love to hear from anyone on the call.
Well, I'm a team of one with some outside service providers, which I haven't actually set that up with them. I just hired an assistant, virtual assistant, I guess is what they're called these days.
Yes.
But with my clients, which I coach automotive shop owners, we have formal meetings with certain groups and we have individual sessions. But what I created was a monthly all group meetup, hour and a half, first Wednesday of the month. Show up with a question or a topic, totally casual, whoever comes, whoever doesn't come. And I found that very invigorating because I actually don't have to run the agenda. I just have to make sure people take turns. They bring the agenda and discuss, and they're meeting regionally now. They used to, we used to meet live in Calgary, in Toronto, and now my clients are mixing and matching and meeting each other and making friendships. And I'm really enjoying the sparks that fly in that. It's just right. So I'm wondering in a corporate setting or a company setting, chances are the broader the group or the broader the company, the more that a meetup like that would help. Now the topics that they need to bring are related to the work we do, but you could set up a meetup with anything, right? With your other suggestions. So
absolutely,
that's been very, very powerful for me. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Murray. And I think you bring up a really great point here, which is these meetings don't have to be lengthy. They don't have to be, really frequent. Just having those touch points set in the calendar as recurring meetings, right? Like a meetup, 1.5 hours. That's amazing. It's really bringing the team together where maybe it's hard for them on their own to do that. And having that rotating chair is something that I've also done in these virtual settings as well. So it takes the pressure off of you and it empowers your team to kind of come to the table with those agenda items as well. Yeah.
Sophia, one of the things that I've experienced in a couple different settings is charity. So depending on the size of organization and how it's organized, sometimes just having a side initiative that brings people together and brings a focus off of the day-to-day hustle and bustle and focusing on a cause that you're all united on, it just sparks conversation and collaboration, to go back to your previous points. And having joined a company in December that's fairly large and very siloed, a lot of people worked all over the province, and I may meet them, but it's going to take a long time. It connected me to them and allowed me to do some virtual introductions that I probably wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So taking the focus off of the business and onto something completely different sparks a different conversation.
I love that. And not only that, but everyone is choosing that bigger purpose or why as well, right? So it's community involvement.
Yeah.
Love that.
We do, just inside our firm, we do a 9:15 Tuesday meeting, and we start with an airing of grievances where we blame each other for things. No, I'm kidding. But we actually do start though with something that's been recommended, and that's a purpose statement. So our purpose is to empower people. So we kind of go around the table and say, over Zoom, what's an example of how you empowered someone this week? And that seems to get some buzz, and people like to talk about that and share stories.
Love that. So some great ideas, or really great ideas there. So thank you for sharing. And I think it ties into this one perfectly, which is the last piece of PACE. Engaged. And, oftentimes people associate an engaged employee with a happy employee, but it goes beyond that. Really, an engaged employee or engaged workforce are people who go above and beyond their role. They're truly fully invested in their role in the company. They want to be a part of that success story. So it goes beyond the happy piece, right? And in this virtual space, it's really important for us to continually kind of check in to assess how people are doing so that they're not operating in silos. We're really asking them how they are. We have to remember that there are a lot of factors that are coming into play now where, people are experiencing fatigue and burnout, etc. So let's start kind of having those touch points. We can assess where our people are at and support them where we need to. Video is a really great opportunity for us to do that, to monitor body language as much as possible as well. That's another reason that I oftentimes encourage my team members to turn on that video. Continue to involve your team in decision making. So Murray brought up a great point of kind of having that rotating person for each of these meetings. That's a great way to get them involved and empower them. And then Shannon and Richard, when you just chatted a little bit about, bringing something else to the table in these meetings that's maybe not even work related. Like, let's find something else to talk about, right? Community engagement or a bigger purpose than sort of what we do, etc. What I used to do was I would allot about 10 minutes at the end of every weekly team meeting as a kudos section. And it was a free for all. And I would say, listen, it's kudos time. And the team loved it. They would jump at the opportunity to go, oh, Sue, thank you so much for helping me out with that report. It was great. You know, hey, Joe, like that was amazing what you did with the client. I saw what you did. And he actually came back saying it was great. So thank you for that. So it's peer-to-peer recognition, which also goes a long way with building, you know, that accountability, productivity piece, collaboration piece as well, and trust within the team. So a lot in kudos goes a long way, and incorporate fun as much as you can. So those screen backgrounds, team building activities, etc. So I will be passing it on to Richard. Again, we'll send you this link, but you know, recently over the last year, I've been focusing a lot in this virtual space because we've been getting a lot of questions from clients about how to operate in this remote kind of environment. So in our Upskill Consulting blog, there's lots there on virtual teams. You can kind of pick and choose which blogs would apply for you. Some of them are around meetings, some of them are around team collaboration, etc. Some energizers, some fun team building. So Murray, for your next meetup, maybe a fun 5-minute icebreaker or team building activity. Those pieces are in there too. So,
Great.
So perfect. So thank you all so much. And I'm going to hand it over to Richard.
All right, thanks, Sophia. So now we're going to switch screens. I'm going to go to screen share. See how I can do this. Now, is that showing?
There it is.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
All right, employment law, hopefully.
Yes.
I get the dreaded dry topic of employment law, and it need not be dry. And I'm being facetious because I find it very mind-blowing and exciting and juicy. But my intention in going through the employment section today is a bit of a hybrid. I certainly echo everything that Sophia said, and I'm pleased that our team is doing some of the things that were recommended, but I'm taking away some notes to prepare a bit of a cheat sheet on what we can do internally in our firm better. But there are some things that need to be remembered when you're dealing with teams in general and in specific remote teams. So I have set out here basically what are the main issues that employers want and the things that employees want. And at the top, you can see I'm saying don't see it as a problem. I actually was very pleased come March of 2020 how in alignment I found workplaces in certain regards. So I found that a lot of employers were brooding over the decisions about their staffing. They really didn't want to make drastic changes. They knew people were going through tough financial times, tough emotional times with COVID. And so they were really taking those decisions seriously if they had to lay off or take action. Employees, on the other hand, were also very willing. I should watch how I say that. Very willing might be strong, but they were willing to take pay cuts. They were willing to take layoffs where need be. They just wanted to know that it was in good faith, that if the business was going to be able to weather the storm, they would do what they had to do to kind of take a hit for the team to get through. And that was really, really quite reassuring for me because I wear two hats in my practice as an employment lawyer. I act for employers and I risk manage and I go to trial for employers. And then on the other hand, I deal for employees sometimes and I act for them. It's usually when there's been a dismissal or a workplace issue has already come up. And so both sides of the coin can inform how I provide advice, right? Because I'm in a position to see where things go sideways. But by and large, we're all looking to get the same aims met at the end of the day. So you're going to get the slides. And so I'm not going to just go through verbatim, but we're all looking to get work done. We want to feel engaged with the work. We want our employees to do a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. We want engaged employees, but they also want to feel engaged, right? And so that's a really important aspect of the cultural issues that we deal with in remote workplaces. We really need to not just lose culture and throw it out the window and say, well, okay, we got a dead zone for a year and a half, or 2 years where COVID happened. People will come back, it'll be fine. We need to keep them tethered to what I call the mothership. You know, keep them tethered to the organization and its purpose. And that's the kind of stuff that will actually provide for a good workforce throughout this, the pandemic and well into the future, because I agree with Sophia, virtual workplaces are not going away. When the law starts to actually use virtual hearings, telephone, Microsoft Teams hearings, when the law and the legal system in BC is changing to adopt those, you know it's here to stay. So this is not a stopgap, because it's slow to adopt technology. And so we've been very fond of this as lawyers. You know, this is great when you don't have to go sit in the courtroom for half a day waiting for your turn. And then we don't want to lose resources, right, as employers. We don't want to just give people a whole bunch of equipment and resources and have them sit at home and not be returning work product. But to the bone dry, there are some legal things we need to keep in mind, and there are some legislative issues that come up, particularly with remote teams. There are certain specifics that I've seen come up since COVID started. The main 3 legislative kind of facets that we deal with commonly is the Employment Standards Act, which you'll all be somewhat familiar with, at least in part, the Human Rights Code that applies in BC. And for those of you who might be involved in interprovincial trucking or other federally governed employment sectors, you've got parallel legislation which will almost be on all fours with what I'm talking about. The provisions will just be a bit different under the Canada Labour Code. And then we've got the Workers' Compensation Act. That is a BC statute. It's got all sorts of occupational health and safety regulations and things about safe workplaces in certain industries, etc. You'll all be too familiar with WCB and premiums that we pay for that lovely system. And then I'm going to go into some practicalities at the end. And I do encourage, as we go through, that you please jump in if you have any. Jeering probably isn't great for my confidence, but if you have, so heckling is discouraged, but say what you like and ask any questions. But I'll just kind of walk through, and then you can raise your hand if you have anything to say or if you've experienced any issues with these types of things. So under the Employment Standards Act, we have a few main obligations to manage the workplace and manage our employees. So you get an employee, you have to record keep. And so you're going to have to, that encompasses a whole bunch of stuff. Collecting data with a view to having maybe emergency contact info, social insurance number, tax information. There's certain stuff that you've got to collect about the employee just to manage that relationship. And then you've got to retain it. And so in managing a remote workforce, we have to be very careful that we don't shoot out the onboarding documents and then never get them back. I mean, some of that will be, you'll have to get it back to process payroll. And believe me, the employee will remind you. But we do have to keep in mind this record keeping function. And also, we have to keep time records. And so this is a big issue that comes to bear when we're dealing with remote work situations. So I hear time and time again from employers, what about my people? I think they're just sitting at home playing, they're not playing solitaire. I don't know what the equivalent would be, the Candy Crush or whatever the kids are playing these days. So, you know, they're not really working from 9 to 4 or 9 to 4:30 or whatever the assigned hours are. And that becomes an issue. And so I just will urge my employer clients to keep up record keeping with remote workers. Have some method of tracking, log in and log out, and have touch points throughout the day. That way you immunize the business against a whole bunch of stuff, including overtime claims that might be brought, making sure that your people are in fact engaged and putting their hand to the tools during the day. And that is our responsibility as employers. So I just wanted to flag that because that is a legislative requirement and it can actually pay off because you get more out of your employees and keep them engaged if you keep track of the time that's being put into the work. There are 4 particular leaves that have come up more recently, the COVID-19 related leave is definitely the most recent of them, because that was an invention of the legislature to apply to COVID. But I found that these 4 leaves are the ones that are coming up most often with remote workforces. And the reason is because a lot of employees are either dealing with their kids not being in consistent schooling, or daycares close, or something as mundane. I have 2 little ones, and so I can attest to the fact that runny noses, I mean, I think it's 10 years where you just have perpetual runny nose. I don't know. I'm learning as I go. But you will have these children that have what you think is probably just a runny nose that they got from daycare, but everybody's super leery to send them into daycare or send them into school. So the kids are home during the day. And so there are these leaves that allow parents some time off, like up to 5 unpaid days a year, or longer leaves for certain provisions, and allow them to deal with their family issues, or an ailing parent. Maybe it is COVID related. Maybe they have to provide support to their family members. And I'm happy to delve into the particulars of the legislation, because I know that would blow your minds. And I know that that's something a lot of people get a kick out of. So raise your hand, and I certainly can do that and go through the particular periods of leave that people get. But generally it's unpaid leave, but it's job protected. So we just have to be mindful that there are these provisions in this modern day and age that recognize people have immediate family members, whether it's grandparents, aunts, uncles, kids, and they can take time to deal with them, and to care for them and support them. And the COVID-19 leave deals with all of that, plus people being off because there's a risk of them infecting others in the workplace, or they have to get tested for COVID. So it's important to bear these in mind. In terms of tools, equipment, and supplies, if you've got people who are working remotely, or you have clients who are, it's coming up a lot that employees want equipment. They want the computer they had at the desk. They want maybe the desk. They want to have some sort of a suitable workstation with internet and phone, and they don't want to be paying for that every month because that's a business cost. And so we always have to be alive to the fact that as employers, we can't charge our folks for business expenses. And so we've had to make arrangements, and we've had to do this on our team, to either provide allowances for people to foot the bill for their internet while they're doing work during the day, sitting at home, maybe phone. And we've used a system called GoToConnect, and so we actually use VoIP phones. So use the tech that's out there, but remember, it's our responsibility as employers under the Employment Standards Act to foot the bill for that and not pass that on to employees. And there are lots of ways to do that that'll keep employees engaged and feeling good that they're not covering the cost of business while they're working from home. And then you can have policies that address how the equipment issues are to kind of roll out. How are you going to get the equipment to people? They will obviously have a duty to keep it in proper repair. Don't use it for inappropriate purposes, like your computer is a work computer. Please be mindful of that. I won't delve. I'll leave it there. But we see interesting things come up sometimes with work equipment and the use of our telephonic systems. And then we've got the Human Rights Code. So that's another thing. So the landscape has sliced and diced. So the legislative landscape is kind of sliced and diced to the extent that you've got now more narrow pieces of legislation dealing with specific aspects. So the Human Rights Code is specifically geared toward making sure people aren't discriminated against because of protected grounds. And so we generally have 13 protected grounds that we identify. The legislation federally is very similar, but I see time and time again people raising concerns if they're at home with their kids and they need time to deal with that in a remote work environment, because it raises family status. And I'm pointing, I know you can't see my screen, but I'm pointing at my screen now. And family status is a big one. And also physical or mental disability is something a lot of employees are raising because of either anxiety issues to do with COVID, someone sick during COVID, or they have some sort of an obligation to care for a family member. Generally, it's them having a disability of some sort or needing some accommodation there. But it does come up with remote work, especially the family status issue, because that encompasses childcare duties and childcare obligations. But we need not expect to have business meetings being conducted over Zoom with our employees having kids and animals and everything running around all the time. And there needs to be tolerance, but there also needs to be an understanding that employers can request bona fide occupational requirements. You've probably all heard this before. And that is just the employer has a set of work that has to get done. Those are good faith requirements of the job. And that's the tension point under human rights in a lot of cases is we have employees who are at home with the kids and the kids are screaming and they're lovely. Kids are lovely, but they yell a lot. And so we've got to manage that with the understanding that we have to accommodate parental duties and our bona fide occupational requirements. And so there will be some tips at the end that I will provide on how to manage that. Questions so far?
We have a question
Smiling.
in the chat, Richard.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
So what about addiction that has manifested and is described as having been developed as a result of COVID? Is it considered a medical condition?
Yes. Just kidding. Yes, it is. And that's a really in-depth issue. And I would love to talk more about that offline, but quick primer on that. COVID is causing a ton of pre-existing issues to bubble up to the surface. And I'm not trying to make light of them, but they are coming up as a result of people being isolated, feeling like they're not part of a social group. Addictions are coming up. Mental health disorders of other kinds are coming up. And so we don't worry too much about the cause or whether it was pre-existing. We just know that the employee has a disability, a physical or mental health issue that needs to be accommodated. But if it's an addiction, they're not allowed to necessarily be under the influence during work. And so you've got to navigate that carefully because it may require time off, unpaid, and preserving the employee's position while they go get help. But again, I take a very human approach to law. And so I think the important thing is to not shy away from the tough conversation of saying, Judy, I don't think we have any Judys on here. Judy, you seem to perhaps be struggling with an issue. We don't know what it is, but we need to suss this out. If it's inappropriate use of alcohol, that's one thing. If it's an addiction, then certainly that's another, and we will accommodate that to undue hardship until it becomes almost impossible. But that needs to happen. And so it's a decision tree almost. Great question, because it is coming up time and time again. But again, the bona fide occupational requirement is important because it requires that we keep our eyes set on the set of work we have to have people doing. And we have a right to ask that.
Richard, one more question, if you don't mind, here from Lori.
Love it.
For the 4 leaves that you discussed in the Employment Standards Act that have come about because of COVID-19, are these all considered unpaid in the Employment Standards Act, or does it depend on the employer contract?
It will depend on the employer contract. Employment contracts need to provide at least the minimum obligations of the Act. And because these are unpaid leaves, you can certainly go above and beyond if you think it gives you a competitive edge or it fits with your workplace culture to offer sick leave. You get 5 paid days a year. That's something that supplements the Act. It meets the requirements and it goes above and beyond. And that can actually be really, really important for attracting a workforce and staying competitive. What I've also seen happen, just out of interest, is unlimited vacation. Mm-hmm. Millennials seem to love this, and I don't mean to just slap a label on a group of people, but I did, I guess. And so millennials seem to love that you've got this abundant vacation entitlement because they'd rather spend their time out doing what they love instead of getting more money. So as long as you're going above and beyond the Act, good on you. You can do what you like. You can offer as many paid days as you want. you could also have a robust short and long-term disability program, which might also fit the bill. And that is a great segue into the Workers' Compensation Act, because this is another area that I'm seeing come up a lot in discussions with my employer and employee clients. Remote workplaces are still workplaces, right? They may be informal to a large extent. They, to use your terminology, Sophia, they may not be traditional workplaces, but they're still workplaces. And so we need to make sure that we've got WCB coverage in place. Of course, we have our employees that are covered, and they continue to be covered while they're in their remote workstation at home. But we're seeing a lot of strain injuries. I suspect that some injuries on the job are arising because, again, there's a bubbling up effect of things that have mounted over the last year. People are isolated. They're sitting at home at a computer, perhaps in a dark space. Or at least that might be how it feels to some people. And it's raising mental health disorders, which might be in part attributable to the workplace. And so these things are still claims that are valid, and it requires that we be communicating with employees and making sure that they're aware of the right to make a WCB claim. Now, WCB, as you know, also has bullying and harassment, basically protocols, requirements. And as soon as somebody says, I think I'm being bullied and harassed, that can trigger the right to make a complaint to WorkSafe BC. And so we need to be alive to that, because this isolation that some employees are feeling is made all the worse when they're being managed. So if you had a particular performance issue before COVID happened, I'm generally finding that it's a tougher slog to manage it in a COVID world with a remote employee, because they're taking corrective acts, or they're taking constructive criticism, and they're taking those sorts of feedback from the manager, and it's becoming sometimes misconstrued as bullying and harassment, whereas it's just management. It's just guidance. And so we're finding a bit of an increase in bullying and harassment complaints through WorkSafe. But remember, you have a right to manage. Bullying and harassment, they specifically say bullying and harassment does not arise when it's a proper managerial decision. That's acceptable. We have a right to manage our teams. Any questions about the legislation? Hopefully that wasn't too dry.
We have a question in the chat box.
Perfect. And I'm sorry, I can't see that. Just
that's okay. That's okay. So the question here is, you mentioned confidentiality. So what happens if employee records, if an employee records a meeting on another device? Can we record the meeting if we are the host? Can you speak to cell phone policies in the workplace, either live or virtual?
Love it. Everybody's got an iPhone or an Android, right? So this issue of recording has come up time and time again. Yeah. The general thrust is that, I'll touch on that first. The general thrust is that you can record if you're a participant. You cannot intercept electronic communications, or else it's a criminal offense. So if I'm going into a meeting with my boss and I've got my phone going, it's not illegal. But the law is starting to become a little bit resistant to allowing that evidence, especially in a unionized environment. I've had the Canada Industrial Relations Board say, no, we're not going to hear that. They just won't hear evidence from an employee that's recorded. They don't want to chill the relationship internal to the workplace. The courts will still hear it if it's relevant to material, but you got to be very careful, because it can be just cause if you have somebody just running around recording everything in the workplace. In terms of privacy in general, most of us are governed by PIPA, the Personal Information Protection Act, because we're private industry in the province. And so you have to be careful that you obtain information only as necessary to employ people, to manage their employment and navigate your way through payroll and all that stuff, and to use that information only for proper purposes, and then to disclose it for proper purposes. So people get up in arms, rightly or wrongly, about being recorded. Even a Zoom meeting. If you have a Zoom meeting, you have a lunch and learn. People don't want that recorded because they don't want their face being used in the future if they're not with the organization, especially. So put it in a policy that all events may or may not be recorded and have employees sign it if that's what you want to do. If you're going to be doing timekeeping or monitoring your internet connection or your intranet connection with remote workers, tell people you're going to be doing it. You're going to get a lot more flies with honey than vinegar, as my mom would say, right? If you're upfront with your people and they get it, you're going to get more buy-in. It's instances where people find out there's a GPS tracker on their fleet car that they get really upset, right? And we can understand that, I think, logically. Nobody wants to be kind of broadsided with Big Brother looking over their shoulder. So you can do it, but make sure there's a policy in place. And I generally recommend for remote teams that you put a policy in place to govern hardware that the employee is going to be using, substance abuse in the workplace or substance use. So just because it's their home doesn't mean they can shoot outside and have a cannabis cigarette. That does not necessarily pass muster. They're still at work. You can't be under the influence while you're working. So I still apply those policies, but in a remote context, and it's tweaking the language in your policy. But address it because people will appreciate that. So I just want to touch on just a few things here. Sofia's wisdom. So everything you said, Sofia, I just can't echo loudly enough. And we are doing some of that on our teams. We have a 9:15 Tuesday morning meeting. We also have virtual lunch every Wednesday. That keeps us nice and tethered. And then we have lunch and learns every month.
Love it.
And so we can actually get professional credit for the lunch and learns. So there is a little bit of an incentive. So if you have an industry that has credit for something, apply for it. You can probably get some credit for your folks that way. Watch your performance. You can still use all your traditional performance management tools, but you're just doing things in a virtual format. And it's okay to watch your folks a little bit closer. People understand that when they're remote, they kind of have to, there's an honor system. They're going to have to get up at 8 and be at their computer by 8:30. And they know that. And most people are trying to do that. Use policies as a means of transparency. Track time for employees. Make sure that you're practical about your expectations and be flexible when talking to people about their individual circumstances. The human rights framework is very individualized, so you have to look at things case by case. So you can have rules, but you really need to make sure that the finite details are flexible enough to deal with Jane's issue, John's issue, their specific kid's schedule maybe. And you might have a bunch of people with some really tailored situations, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's not so black and white.
No, it's not. And then have your employment agreements in place, addressing the workplace. When COVID happened, we didn't have layoff provisions in a lot of contracts, and people started saying, you can't do it. And most of them subsequently agreed as an addendum to their contract to take a layoff. But unless it's in the contract, something like that can be considered a dismissal and can expose us to severance liability. So we just have to be really careful. And so that's me, but the devil is in the details. And so I do urge people to reach out and ask questions as things come up.